what we've got going on here is a really, really cool spaceship design, and we're trying to work our way through the space station interior. And I think this brings up a good point, is if any of y'all have ever done interior design in real life, in the real world, what you find is that a lot of times all it takes is a one starter piece within the room, one piece of furniture that will help you to be able to work through the rest of the space. And that's what we've got here, right? So we've got one piece of furniture that is giving us a shape language for this interior that we're about to create. Now, space stations, there's nothing easy about filling a giant area like this. So with all the sci-fi stuff that we've been working with, we need to go in and get some idea of what the base shapes are going to be for this interior space. So within some of the references that we saw, we had a sort of an opening, sort of a classic kind of spaceport with the ground being shown in there. So I think that this one, it's a small laboratory space, but what I'm interested in within this red reference that I just dropped in here is the overall lines and shapes that this room is giving me. So let me start off with something like that. So let's go in here. Sorry, I know my line's a little bit hard to see, so I'll zoom in. I usually like working really small right at the beginning for the opening for this. Here we go. So we've got a line coming in. Bring this down, so we don't really need the history right now. We've got our spaceport, and what do we have over here? So we've got this line that's moving up. All right, so we got a nice sharp line there. It's curved, and it's moving up and across. There we go. Now we've got our boxy shape that we're designing. Notice we've got the curve down at the bottom, and I haven't forgotten about the spaceship. So this is just arbitrarily sort of blocking in the big volumes within this space. That's a pretty good starting position. We can even tighten this up a little bit more, make some stuff that's existing outside of our space station, and then we've got this big sort of circular shape that's moving on down. So once we've got and I like that the circular shape has got kind of a square backside to it. That's nice. I want to include that. And then as that opens up, it's sci-fi design, so we want to break this out just a little bit more. All right, so we've got some starting shapes and patterns here that I'm working with. All right. A big room, and now we've subdivided that room in some interesting ways. You can imagine that space, our big planet exists out here. Our ship is starting to come into the dock. So if we want, we can even start to block in where that ship might be at. Sorry, I'm not doing a one-for-one copy on the ship. He's got all kinds of different planes going on here. I'm just trying to copy some of them so we can get an idea of how it might come in. All types of other wings and stuff that are going on back here. They're pretty interesting. And got these three shapes that are going on at the end. Cool. So there's our spaceship that's starting to enter into the spaceport. We've got an opening for our spaceport, and now we've got some room even here in the front if we want to do a handrail, just to be able to give some closeness to this overall shot. All right, safety first in sci-fi, always important. So one thing that I talked about earlier is if you're going to do a handrail, and this is sort of the way to think about all this stuff, we're not just doing a boring handrail. This is the handrails of the future. So you can start to break up your handrail in some kind of interesting way, usually around the corners. Helps an awful lot. And then from there, let's just, everything is totally ergonomic. So we're going to break that up just a little bit further into that third level of detail. So this pattern that I'm showing you guys right now, how to be able to break up some of these spaces, is going to come in handy for every section within this shop. But now that we've got our space handrail within here, the spot where I think that most people have trouble with is figuring out how to be able to break this space up further, especially for a massive interior, if you have not done too many massive interior spaces. So let's go in and we're going to do some stairs. Stairways still exist within the future. Let's give this some kind of idea of handrails along the way, and then we're going to make this feel like it's curved as it's going down. That all looks good. Handrail going along the edge of this is awesome. Space handrail. So this gives us a nice open area to be able to sort of break up. Maybe you could put like some boxes for scale down here. Actually make them look like they're sitting on the ground. Other stacks of stuff. Cables are always good to be able to run across here as well, just to be able to give some sense of scale. So now we've established that's the handrail here, and this is our handrail down here. So we've got a sense of scale of this overall piece. Now, the important part is, this guy can still come in handy. He can still help us out a little bit, but he's not as important. This, we're going to make him a little bit more tiny as well. Now, what I'm interested in here is figuring out how I can take some of these lines from the ship and apply them to the interior of this space in a meaningful way. So when we look at this, right, I'm looking at the shape of that wing right there. So if I draw it larger, it looks like and that's a pretty good and successful sort of sci-fi wing looking shape. Start to play around with that, subdivide it just a little bit more, give it some other areas, and we've got something that's pretty successful. So that shape is something that I want to try to incorporate into the base, so it feels like the same designers created this interior as well. So that is the trick to being able to populate this area. So let's go in, and we've got, within our reference image over here, that's on the other side, we've got this kind of curved shape that's moving across the walls. But since we've got this ship design, we want to use that same curvature, right? So that's our underlying kind of shape for this thing. But we can break this up with the line choices from our ship. So that same sort of sci-fi design for the ship start to work its way through the interior. All right. So let's see what I can do if I can pull this off. Sort of a monitoring system right there. And we're starting to break up this wall in sort of a meaningful way. Same thing. So this is protruding out here. Let's get a little bit of repetition going on within the shape. And then we've got this line that's sticking out. Let's make that intentional and bring it on down. So now we've got repetition that we've introduced. Let's do one more just so that we get that rule of 3 in there. And then we're going to do something else just to be able to break this space up. All right, get another one that's starting to hang down. This area comes down. That bulge is going to be intentional. We're going to use that later on. And now you can see that we're starting to get something that is layered up and feeling similar to the ship already. Now, when we look at this reference image over here, we're taking that same donut type shape that they've included within the reference image. I hope that you can see that right there. And we're going to apply this to the interior. So now let's go in and let's do these lines going all the way across. And we've just broken up that space in an interesting and meaningful way. So to keep things from feeling boring, this is sci-fi. So in the middle, we're going to break this up. Let's help it go across. That's a little bit wonky of a look of a shape. Let's open this up. And because we do have these curvatures that are going on, let's break this up at the end. So it's just got a little bit of roundness to it. Again, keeping in mind the scale. And so now that's starting to break that up to where it looks like sort of an entry and exit space. You can break this up right here. Sorry, those lines aren't in line with, there we go. That's starting to look a lot better. So let's go in and let's take some of these other lines. So we've got a big flared shape that's going on here. This is going to drop back just a little bit. So let's see if we can't use some of that flared shape that we've been describing here a moment ago to be able to drop this thing back. All right, that feels sort of interesting to me. And that's in line with this shape right here. So and we've also got this big shape that I want to use where it goes off into these long sprees. So how can we use one of those shapes within this interior so that it feels the same? Let's go in and drop all this back. And let's do an even smaller handrail over on this side. Okay. That feels interesting to me. Big old machinery, whatever, just some lines to be able to break it up. And now we've got a water feature. Every space station needs a water feature. Break that up just a little bit. And there it goes. So that feels strong. From here, we can start to open some of this up. And again, we wanted that sharp line that opens up and then comes out.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What exactly are you drawing here?
So this is another platform.
Okay, it's another
So
platform. Okay, yeah.
on this side, we're establishing that we've got kind of a standing space that we're looking out from
Yeah,
our handrails. And so I'm just mirroring that over to the other side.
as you would. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So now we're kind of showing what the inside of that looks and feels like and trying to, again, include as many of those shapes You can get some good distance going on back over here. Start to break this up. And that's looking pretty interesting. Back over there, right? And so what do we describe? Yeah, we got those angles that are coming down, and now we've got a big old space that we can design over here. We said that there's this landing area. So I want to continue to put that landing area right in here. You can give that a couple different layers. So let's give it another staircase going down, another platform. Do doorway. Maybe it's got a few different bunkers for smaller pieces of equipment or garages on itself. And that's another thing that we can set back just to be able to break up the form. Always, just like we found with the window panes on the modern city, we can break up these areas in unique ways. Break them up down at the bottom. And now as we get this to the ground, there's all types of different pieces of equipment and other things that we can design for this. We got our space handrail, continues on across. And now we're starting to build something that has the same line structure as our ship. There we go. Just to be able to give it some kind of line to be able to break this thing up. And one more little tiny one right here. That's given a good rhythm and repetition. And now we've got a whole bunch of negative space right here to be able to fill up with some kind of sci-fi design. But let's go in and let's start working on the outer edges of this space station. So again, wherever I see just a boring straight line like this, it's sci-fi, man. You can go in and do something really interesting. So let's start breaking this up in some kind of interesting and unique way. Open that up here and let's push it down. Make that some type of shape. This. Go. Those micro little small details. And now we're in a pretty good state to where suddenly this is a lot more interesting. It might be too busy, honestly, than just a straight line. So let's back that up and let's just go out with something like that. There we go. So now it's just dropping in and going back. I think that feels a little bit more clean. It's not as busy as the other one, which is fine by me. Kind of grading right there. Same thing goes for this. Wherever it becomes a straight line, we're just going to break it up just a little bit. And where did I learn how to do this stuff? So I was really obsessed with a comic book back in the day called Brass that came out from Image Comics, and this techno sort of techno babble design stuff. They did it really, really well, where they broke it up into all kinds of tertiary levels of detail. And I spent like an entire summer copying the panels from this artist, trying to figure out how they were doing all this stuff in such a remarkable way. And it was like kind of car parts mixed with like computer bits for how they were designing these things. And also the game from Blizzard way back in the day, StarCraft, was a really big influence on me as well. So all the levels, I played a ton of StarCraft, all the interior Terran levels on like Terran bases, and the user interface for StarCraft has got this sort of design to it. And I remember learning how to draw this stuff when I was really young, and then years and years later, I would end up getting a job for ESPN Sunday Ticket and having to recreate their branding style, which was totally using the StarCraft design language and the Brass design language that this stuff really is. And I couldn't believe it. And I knocked this stuff out, totally impressed the client. They're like, how did you know how to be able to, how could you recreate that stuff? because they were recreating it and I knew what the sources were and I practiced it when I was younger. So learning how to be able to sort of work across these spaces, keeping the principles of design in mind while you're doing it. Repetition, pattern, breaking up your large straight lines with more interesting kind of forms and shapes. So like this is a little bit boring right here, but I think for the most part it's needed. We are kind of establishing this diagonal here, so I would like to, wherever I could, let's just connect all this stuff. Leave this one going down so it's nice and clean. And now let's get that diagonal moving through there again. So there, and let's get one more going over here. How to be able to connect these things to the ground sometimes can be a little bit tricky as well. Just like tree roots, figuring out where to place them. So like we saw with the 1940s and 50s interiors, adding some type of baseboards to this stuff really can help a lot. There we go. And so very quickly, we've got this space that feels like an interior. The design language is matching with the ship quite a bit better. And it's all starting to feel like it came from the same designer. And this, once you've got the lines and the rules figured out for what it is that you're going to be creating, it becomes a lot easier to be able to subdivide all of these pieces. In interesting and meaningful ways that are in line with the design language that you established. Here we go. And I think that's going to be just about enough for this one. If there's a corner or something that feels a little bit boring, I'm just going to go ahead and break it up. And again, I'm trying to create that same feeling that's going on with the ship as many places as I can throughout the rest of the design. So I'm looking at the same shapes and angles that I'm using on this ship here and trying to replicate those throughout the interior of the ship, all the way down to the handrails and across the walls. So wherever I can start to create repetition. So I saw this line moving down. So rule of three, I want to use that same line going down and then one more over here. Same thing with this shape. I want to repeat it 3 times. I've got a platform that I've established over next to where the camera or the viewer is at. And so it gives me an opportunity to be able to show the viewer what it's going to look like on the other side. And then I'm using the general shape language from this interior shot just to be able to get some idea that I can't make up on my own of how I would break this space up visually. I'm just not that good at figuring it out at first, but once you've got something, then you can start to do it throughout the rest of the piece. So just that base from this red image in the top left-hand side, helped me figure out how I could break up visually or get the base shapes. And then I'm building on top of those base shapes and seeing where I can subdivide them with shapes that are very similar to the shape language that's happening within the ship design here. Got any questions?
I don't really have any questions, more so just clarification of the process of building your background. So, of course, having the references first to help you have a starting area. And in my case, since I have a stronger design for my ship versus my space station, using
Yeah.
my space station as also another reference to again help keep that same like similarity of design, since this is supposed to be made by the same designer to help me design the bits and pieces of the ship, then having like a basic startup like foundation. So like the opening, the floor and the ceiling and the walls, and then bit by bit adding in details here and there that resemble the ship. And also the rule of thirds and all of that repetition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. It sort of combines everything we've been talking about in these previous projects in a really unique way. Whereas the first project, right, the Welcome to the Jungle one, was all about figuring out how to be able to tell a complex story without having to draw every single leaf. In this one, we are going down into that third level of detail and sort of tattooing the larger body forms of this composition that we're designing and creating. And yeah, so you don't have to really necessarily. I mean, I just found a picture of what I thought was a unique shape language for an interior. Since I have a lot of trouble figuring out how to be able to break up those interior spaces myself, and using that as a rough guide for how this might work really helps out a lot. So again, with that interior up here, I'm going to draw on top of a new layer. Let's go with green. You can see it. Red and green are the most even. Yeah, that's the one that'll show up. All right. So within this one, we've got, let me zoom in here. We've got this line that's going across. This line is important to me. I like this shape over on this side is what I'm seeing in my head, right? I'm really noticing this curvature, and I think that that's pretty beautiful and pretty awesome. I like this big old shape. And then I noticed when I'm studying that shape that it stays sharp on this side, curved on this side. There we go. Got some thickness to it. All right. And yeah, and then there's, I guess, another shape that's sticking out in the back that I thought was pretty interesting. So that's what my mind locked onto, was these green lines. And then as we move back here, I'm sort of using those same green lines. Let's get big so you can see it. So we got this hanging piece that gets sharp, right? We've got our curved lines that come on down and then come across. And then I've got my curve over here on the left-hand side that's coming down. And then I've got this big old piece over on the back that's sticking out behind the, what you call it, the entryway, just to be able to give us a little bit more interest. So does that help you understand the way that what my eyes are seeing and what details I'm picking up from my reference image and then applying them to this larger interior? Can
A
you
bit,
see it?
yes. A bit. Yeah, I can no, I can definitely see the like the basic shapes and everything. The detail part is still going to be a bit of a learning curve for me, but um I think that's just like part of the process, just going through it and just trying things. Because I also noticed that you were just trying different shapes and seeing how they worked, and then ones that you liked, you went with it and pushed it even further, and others you would just like erase and start over again. So Yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty fast too. When you see me actually get up to speed on these things, it's just if you've never done this before, I'm sure it's pretty frustrating watching someone be like, "Yeah, and then just subdivide this here, and do this thing, and all of a sudden you've got a perfect origami crane."
Right. Yeah. Like, how do we get from step 5 when we were on step 1 2 seconds ago? Like, but
All right, so
it's yeah.
so that's the deal, right? Is I've done a lot of sci-fi work during my like formative years when I was a teenager and really studied this stuff. So I've got a memorized hand. And if you don't have this stuff memorized inside of your hands or in your visual vocabulary inside of your head, then you just need to look at the references that are out there. And you'll notice with just about every one of the sci-fi references, any one of these that I pick here is going to have the same tertiary levels of detail. And this is what I was talking about in the intro video for this project. So this guy, let's now that we've looked at building an interior, I think red. Well, here, let me darken this whole thing up so that we can see it a little bit easier. All right. All right. So within this spaceship, any of these sci-fi designs are going to work on these same principles. So we stop zooming in, buddy. All right. We've got our big base shape here. All right. So that's looking at that. That's almost like a scope from a rifle is what it feels like to me. That's probably what they used as a reference. If I had to guess with the way that these shapes are broken up. And just like that, with the scope of a rifle, we've got two different components. From there, we've got the rounded front in the front of it. And that's sort of where we're at with a lot of these projects. You guys are starting off, you're building up your shapes, but then you don't really understand all this extra gobbledygook that's going on the inside of it, or how to be able to subdivide these shapes further to be able to make them interesting, right? So I'm seeing within a lot of people's example projects right now, maybe they get this far with it, or where they're at with their sketches. I mean, this is a cool sci-fi shape right here. Like that line totally works. There's a lot of stuff that we can build into it. But then it's figuring out, with that thinner line, how to be able to go in and start dividing some of these spaces further. So again, yeah, it all goes back to how to get you there visually, this thing. So this is what I started off with in the very first example. It's a circle with some circles on the inside of it. And sci-fi design is all about going in and then subdividing it further. So once we subdivide this, instead of just doing another line that's boring, that starts to become too repetitious, let's break it up and give it kind of this gear shape. And if this isn't something that you've really done a lot of before, when you start to feel your hand making sort of boring or dead areas, then you just need to go in and study some of these images. Look at what these artists are doing. And if you've got a cylinder within your spaceship that you're drawing, look at the way that they've broken up the cylinder and added this like hard edge or this rectangle that's sticking out of it. And then look a little bit deeper and see how they've broken down that rectangle to give it just a couple more little details on the inside of it to make it more interesting. Same thing goes if you got a straight line around here, that straight line is becoming a little bit dead, and you're going to break it up sci-fi wise with two little lines going through it. And then once you start to just look at some of these reference images and say, okay, I've got a cylinder, then how are they breaking it up? Well, they've created this sort of cam lock thing to the cylinder. It's pretty visually interesting. I'm going to just steal that for now and apply it to my own painting. And once you do that and you redraw these, you are creating something akin to a master study where your hand is going to start to memorize this shape language. And once you've got this shape language memorized, after a while, you're going to find yourself saying, okay, well, this is what the majority of those sci-fi windows are sort of broken up into. And I know that a lot of them have got this, kind of overhang on the side of them. And here's some ways that I can take the holes within the windows, typical sci-fi shapes here, right? This is what they created, break it down. And then, we start to subdivide those little sections just a little bit more. You get screws, screw holes that you're starting to draw and design. And that is exactly what I'm creating with mine as well. So you can see I've got my lines that are going through here, and I'm starting to intuitively start to subdivide this stuff just a little bit less, or in the same way. Same thing is happening with these. So we're breaking it down, starting to subdivide it, give it its little its screw holes. Same thing is happening with this. So we've got a big plane, and I'm breaking it apart down into its fine little details, giving it those lines so that it's not just boring, but because this is a massive shape, I can't go too crazy with the forms and the edges that I'm designing. So I have to keep it a little bit more flat. It's a big city size structure. And there's probably a fourth level of detail that I need to add to this thing to be able to make it really sing. So for any of you guys who came in late a little bit earlier today, I'm working on these couple shot on the orthographic views and bringing them to where they're really developed in order to drop them into this shot. And you can see that the lighting matches up with the way that I want it for both the ships. I'm doing a top left light source, and that these two ships that I'm drawing in my orthographic view can be dropped into my shot. Same thing is happening with my first composition rendering. This ship can be dropped into this scene, and the lighting matches up on both of them, and then I should be able to paint these in. So I've got the white pass to do, and then after I get done with the super bright highlight pass, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to add a secondary color and the smaller little stickers and decals into these things, and then I get into actually painting these and then making sure that these guys match up with the rest of my scene, and painting these objects that are very much separate right now in the orthographic view. Let me not switch around too much in the orthographic view, so that they match into a final painting. But this is allowing me to be able to figure out some stuff and develop things at the same time. And it should look pretty cool just showing off the line art next to the fully colored ones and sort of separating those out when I put it in my portfolio. And that's where I'm heading. So lots of stuff to think about, consider when it comes to sci-fi art. So we've looked at developing our shapes further when we're doing too simplified of shapes previously tonight. There we go. Updating those shapes. We've looked at how to be able to take a techno-organic jellyfish planet and set ourselves up for a little bit more success in that area, and how to be able to create a platform for our characters to be able to walk around on and to be able to really show off the themes of our scene, and to be able to push past a little bit beyond just looking at this from a display shot. So that's what I would call this right here. This is sort of a display shot of the idea, where we've got the space station back there, the space elevator that's coming up, and then this is actually how we would show it off within an animated film or TV show, where the characters are actually existing within this space and walking around. And then we've got the space elevator moving up in the background. It's on its own layer, so I could go in and animate it within and set up a parallax if I want to zoom the camera in on this a little bit, but I don't think I'm going to do that. Anyways,
you're doing too much.
I'm doing too much. I know I'm doing too much. I want to leave you guys absolutely like mind blown and excited about environment art and painting. And yeah, thanks for checking out this evening. I'm going to stop recording for now, and that's all we got for now. Time to paint some more white scenes.